Fantasyland, 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 Fantasyland. If you haven't picked it up yet, this video is going to be about Fantasyland. Today, this episode's going to be all about the history of Fantasyland, or perhaps more so, the fantasy of Fantasyland. Because today we're going to be looking back at the Fantasyland that never was. Fantasyland was quite a different place in the Magic Kingdom when it opened in 1971. Back then, the Mad Tea Party didn't even have a roof. It was all open-air seating. Ariel wasn't even a thing yet. Dumbo was here, but it definitely wasn't there. And there certainly wasn't two of them. Where the mine train chugs now, there was a turquoise lagoon over 20,000 leagues deep. This was a musical theater show starring Mickey. Now it's one that stars Donald. And nothing flies too high in the sky above It's a Small World anymore. Yes, the Fantasyland of 1971 was quite different from the Fantasyland we know today. But did you know that the Fantasyland of 1971 was actually quite different from the Fantasyland that was originally considered? So let's take a look at some of the original properties and concepts that were considered for Magic Kingdom's original Fantasyland.
The Magic Kingdom, right from the get-go, was basically presented as the bigger, better Disneyland of the East. Walt surely had the intention of replicating attractions that, as he put it, had basic appeal. But a lot of the original intention of the Magic Kingdom was for it to be a completely new and exciting animal.
We have many things in mind that could make this unique and different than Disneyland. We know the basic things that have this, what I call, family appeal. But there's many ways that you can use those certain basic things and give them a new decor, a new treatment. In fact, I've been doing that with Disneyland. Some of my things, I've redone them as I've gone along, reshaped them. This concept here will have to be something that is unique, and so that there is a distinction between Disneyland in California and whatever Disney does. Notice I didn't say Disneyland in Florida. Whatever Disney does in Florida.
So let's begin the tour of the Magic Kingdom Fantasyland that never was. We'll begin as if we had just entered in from Tomorrowland. As we turn from the former Tomorrowland Terrace and walk past the Mad Tea Party, the first attraction we'll encounter is The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. This attraction is a totally lovely dark ride that takes its guests through the pleasantly wholesome happenings going on with the silly old bear himself, Winnie the Pooh. We pass through familiar scenes and songs and characters from the film in a short and sweet outing into the 100-acre wood. Most Disney fans will know, however, that Winnie the Pooh is not the original resident of this attraction. This space was once home to a Mr. J. Thaddeus Toad. The Magic Kingdom iteration of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was often lauded as much superior to its Disneyland counterpart, its most notable difference being the addition of a second ride track that would operate simultaneously. We can find a lot of influences from Mr. Toad present in the current Winnie the Pooh attraction today, but on a different timeline, not even Mr. Toad would have occupied this space. In fact, one of the original intentions for this real estate would have had it designated for an attraction based upon the Sword in the Stone. The Sword in the Stone is the 1963 Disney feature that follows the exploits of a young boy called Wart, who would become the future King of England, as he is mentored by an eccentric wizard, the iconic and mystically scatterbrained Merlin. While the film featured many set pieces and songs that surely would have lent themselves well to a dark ride adaptation, Imagineers zeroed in on the film's grand finale, the wizard's duel between Merlin and the Mad Madam Mim. This Sword in the Stone attraction would have put guests right in the middle of the magical fracas. Guests would ride from room to room and witness the dueling wizards as they transform into different and amusing animalistic versions of themselves. This would continue throughout the ride all the way up to the grand finale, where guests would encounter the Madam Mim in her towering dragon form. The ride vehicles would circle around her as Merlin would disappear and deal the final blow, and the ride would conclude. Of course, the Sword in the Stone would find some sort of presence in Fantasyland with the placement of an actual sword in the stone. For many years, Merlin himself would lead a ceremony picking out a child from the crowd who almost certainly would have the good nature and supernatural strength required to remove the blade from the rock. Regardless though, we could have had a Sword in the Stone dark ride. As we continue our tour towards Frontierland, we will next find the home to what was originally Snow White's Scary Adventures. This ended up being another clone of a popular and pretty freaky Disneyland dark ride. Snow White's Scary Adventures was of course based off the movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first full-length animated feature film, and the attraction would uniquely retell its story by bringing guests to iconic scenes from the film, including the dwarf's cottage, the evil witch's lair, and perhaps most notably, the spooky happenings in the woods. While it's safe to say Snow White's Scary Adventures probably wasn't anybody's favorite attraction, it was still a fairly decent dark ride experience. Nevertheless, the adventure would tote its last guest in May of 2012 to make way for the new Fantasyland expansion that would bring the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train attraction just across the way. Even though it didn't infringe on that real estate at all, perhaps Disney believed that Snow White would now be overrepresented in the park, so therefore she would need to be replaced by a meet and greet. A dark ride was replaced by a meet and greet. An opening day dark... I still don't understand. Anyways, Snow White, if you can believe it, was not the original princess intended for this space. It was briefly considered that perhaps Cinderella would be a good fit for the attraction. Pun intended. After all, she already occupied the biggest house on campus, the focal point of the Magic Kingdom, and probably even Walt Disney World itself, Cinderella Castle. But as brainstorming and discussions continued, it became pretty apparent that the story of Cinderella, while endearing and magical in nature, didn't really offer enough in drama and excitement and fantasy needed for a dark ride. I mean, beyond running late and translucent footwear, that is. So Imagineers looked back towards Disneyland and before putting their faith back into Snow White, glanced toward the humble yet mighty Sleeping Beauty Castle. Or more so, what was going on inside. The Sleeping Beauty Castle walkthrough experience, which told the story of Sleeping Beauty through the use of simple animated vignettes, was a big success at the time. The walkthrough is based off the 1959 Disney film Sleeping Beauty, which followed the beautiful but kind of boneheaded Aurora as she dances with a stranger in the woods. Meanwhile, the incredibly noble and selfless 16-year sacrifice of 3 magical fairies is completely undone in a matter of minutes because their awe-inspiring self-control could not be extended for just a few more hours because this girl's gotta have a pretty birthday cake, right? Anyway. The film is perhaps most known for the inclusion of the most menacing villain in Disney's catalog, Maleficent. Or wait, is she actually good now? I'm not keeping track. The film employed the art of Mary Blair and the background work of artist Ivan Earle, and for me, it's one of the best looking Disney films Walt Disney Animation has ever made. For Walt Disney World, Imagineering wanted to elevate Disneyland's walkthrough experience further, so concepts for a Sleeping Beauty dark ride were developed. The ride would show off familiar scenes from the film, likely employing the visually stunning artwork of Mary Blair and Ivan Earle. The attraction would revisit these scenes with the added threat of being pursued throughout by Maleficent's goons. They'd be obvious in each set piece, lurking in the trees or hiding somewhere in the background. These scenes would have all led to the grand climax of the attraction, a terrifying showdown with Maleficent herself. Guests would find the sorceress transformed into a gigantic fire-breathing dragon and would have to find a way to escape the flames, and spoiler alert, they always would. Outside of the occasional meet and greet and parade appearance, it's much harder to find Sleeping Beauty represented within the Magic Kingdom. While Disneyland does have the walkthrough experience, they too have never had an actual Sleeping Beauty dark ride. But regardless, the Magic Kingdom almost did. So from what is now a literally lifeless meet and greet, we'll take a quick lap around the Prince Charming Carousel and begin heading towards Fantasyland's west side, where we come upon the arguable dark ride favorite of the entire land. Peter Pan's flight, by way of some pixie dust and Imagineering magic, is able to send guests soaring on flying pirate ships over a bustling London skyline and through the spectacular vistas of Neverland. Peter Pan's flight is based off the 1953 film, which sees the darling children joining Peter Pan to Neverland, where they engage in all sorts of magical shenanigans, including mermaids and time bombs and the nefarious Captain Hook. Peter Pan Flight is a truly great attraction, and out of all the rides in Fantasyland, it is by far the most fantastic, but this ride sucks in comparison to what might have been. Originally, this space would have been given to another English legend,
Mary Poppins!
Mary Poppins, of course, the 1964 classic film without flaw, is without a doubt practically perfect in every way, and surely its dark ride adaptation would have been equally so. Imagineers had a few more ideas as to how they would incorporate Poppins into Fantasyland. one of which would have somewhat mimicked the Peter Pan flight ride system but would have swapped the pirate ships for overturned parrot umbrellas, essentially putting guests themselves into the role of Mary Poppins as she would soar into and over the smoky, chimney-peppered rooftops of a foggy London town. I love this concept. For me, the best part of Peter Pan's flight is easily the soaring trip over London, and the idea of a whimsical Poppins-esque take on that display, extended for the duration of an entire experience, would be phenomenal. Another approach that was perhaps more actively explored was one that would have seen guests sporting unique small-scale carousels, furnished with magical horses that at some point after the attraction start would seemingly jump out of rotation and into a colorful chalk painting, and would bob guests through recreated dark ride scenes of the Jolly Holiday sequence in Mary Poppins. Along the way, guests would encounter Bert the dapper screever / chimney sweep, a supercalifragilisticexpialidocious horse race, and perhaps the most underrated characters of the entire film. These guys.
View halloo!
Oh yes, definitely. View halloo. View halloo?
And it is with deep sadness that I report to you that after not too long, these plans were scrapped, and these days Mary Poppins is basically only found in a meet and greet capacity. For a grand season of time, the film was finally realized, albeit briefly, in a dark ride form, via a short snippet in the Great Movie Ride in Hollywood Studios, and alas, that has now come and gone as well. The fact that 50 years later, we still don't have a dedicated Mary Poppins dark ride is a travesty. A Mary Poppins something was robustly announced for Epcot at the most recent D23, but the current pandemic has forced Disney to backtrack on whatever it might have been for the time being. And as many rumors would suggest, it was probably going to be much less exciting than these original Magic Kingdom ideas. Regardless, we were close. We could have had a Mary Poppins dark ride. That brings us over to what is now the end of the land. Today, there's a bathroom themed to Tangled, the walls of the Harbor House, and the entrance to Magic Kingdom's next land, Liberty Square, a respectful tribute to colonial America, home to attractions like the Hall of Presidents, the Liberty Bell, and the Haunted Mansion. The Tangled bathroom is no doubt exciting, but you know what really excites the crap out of me? The idea of another attraction in this space. Imagineering's original desire was to have a ride in this area that would serve as a bridge bringing the two lands together, an attraction that could serve as a fantastic transition from the magic of Fantasyland to the respectful history of America in Liberty Square, and Disney already had the perfect property to do it with. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was a Disney adaptation of the classic Washington Irving story of the same name. Remembered via the 1949 package film called The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, the tale followed the sneaky exploits of Ichabod Crane, a lanky and superstitious scoundrel of a schoolteacher. The ride would have modeled the movie, as guests would experience different vignettes from the film via the ride vehicle of a hollowed-out jack-o'-lantern. The ride would then climax with a scary encounter with the Headless Horseman himself. Whether we as guests would have met the same fate as Ichabod does in the movie would have remained to be seen. Guys, the movie is hardcore, and this would have been really spooky and relatively at home with the likes of fantasy and the colonial era, especially right next to the Haunted Mansion, and in a perfect world, the whole thing would have certainly been narrated by Bing Crosby.
Man, I'm getting out of here.
Ultimately, though, it was decided that there should be no Sleepy Hollow attraction, actually no attraction at all. These days, you can see the Headless Horseman at Halloween parties, or you can go get a delicious funnel cake at the actual Sleepy Hollow quick service restaurant. Funnel cakes are good and all, but regardless, we could have had our own Sleepy Hollow dark ride. By the time construction on Disney World would begin and decisions would need to be made, Walt was gone. So the final say-so fell upon Roy, Walt's brother and right-hand man. Roy reasoned that guests coming to Disney World would likely never be able to go to Disneyland themselves and would probably want to experience the rides that they had heard about or seen pictures of, and thus, for the Magic Kingdom, we got a handful of clones. Things were certainly different back then, so who knows if the same decisions would have been made today. Now let me clarify this, I'm not knocking these rides, like, at all. In most cases, these are or were duplicates of great and fantastic Disneyland rides that once established in the Magic Kingdom would become significantly amplified and enhanced. I'd argue in comparison to Disneyland's Mr. Toad, Snow White, and especially Peter Pan, the Magic Kingdom's iterations are vastly superior. But holy moly guys, we were this close. We could have had these. We might have had these. Could have had a Sword in the Stone ride, a Sleepy Hollow ride, a Mary Poppins ride, a Poppins ride in the Magic Kingdom.
Maybe it's because the grass is always greener, but you know, All 4 of those ideas sound pretty cool, and I would have loved to have seen them in place here at the Magic Kingdom. But who's to say that those rides, those attractions would still be in place in the Fantasyland 2020? Things change, rides update, it's all good. And you know what? We got Peter Pan's flight here. We got Pooh Bear here. We got the meet and greet thing. Yeah, that's not as good. Where was I? All in all, we've got a wonderful Fantasyland, but I'll never not wonder about that Fantasyland in the Magic Kingdom that might have been. Until next time, we'll see you in the happy place. Bye.